Welcome to Maryville College and the third and final presentation of the 2025-26 Witherspoon Lecture Series. My name is Aaron Astor. I'm a history professor here at Maryville College, and speaking on behalf of the college, I'm very pleased you have joined us in this semi-quincentennial year of the country's founding, revolution in the Southern Appalachians. For the last 5 years, our president, Dr. Brian Coker, has focused the college's efforts on becoming more, quote, of and for the region. Using opportunities like this lecture series to align on that mission are important. And from the incredible attendance we have seen this semester, including the last two lectures, it appears that you agree that of and for the region is important as well. Newell and Mary Lee Witherspoon, members of the classes of 1952 and 1956, respectively, endowed this program in 2022. The Witherspoons' intention was to bring to the campus presentations by outstanding academic and professional individuals and to support opportunities that bring campus and wider community members together to learn about and discuss topics that are important, timely, and of broad interest. Unlike the previous two presentations, unfortunately, Newell and Mary are not able to be here tonight, but please join me in showing our appreciation for their generosity. Now, before I introduce our speaker, we have a special presentation to which I'd like to call your attention. Will President Coker and Linda Miller and Kathy Liltrelli, Regent and Vice Regent of the DAR's Mary Blount chapter, please come forward.
DAR America 250 commendation medals and certificates are awarded to non-member individuals and groups who have made outstanding contributions to preserving the legacy of the American Revolution. Recipients of this award are recognized for their dedication to honoring Revolutionary War patriots, educating the public, and raising community awareness during America's 250th anniversary. Because of the Witherspoon Family Endowment and the work of Maryville College in providing the Witherspoon Lecture Series, Revolution in the Southern Appalachians and the Making of East Tennessee, the Mary Blount Chapter National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, along with our sister chapters of East Tennessee, are proud to present you with the DAR America 250 Commendation Medal and Certificate. It is our pleasure to recognize you for your dedicated efforts to celebrate and commemorate our nation's 250th anniversary. Thank you.
We appreciate the support of the DAR Mary Blount chapter. Many are in attendance here this semester. And we also need to thank the East Tennessee Historical Society, which is recording all of this year's Witherspoon lectures to share with audiences later this spring. I should mention, by the way, that the first lecture was my own from a month ago. Is actually just went live, I think yesterday. And on the Facebook, I think Maryville College's Facebook has promoted it, but it is now available. We appreciate you being here. Now, for our speaker, Dr. Chris Magra is professor of early American history at the University of Tennessee and the director of the Center for the Study of Tennesseans and the War. He earned his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh in 2006 and joined the faculty of the University of Tennessee in 2010. Dr. Magra's areas of expertise span the maritime dimensions of the American Revolution, slavery, the Trans-Appalachian South, and the history of food and agriculture in the Atlantic world. He's been selected for several teaching awards and fellowships and has overseen the theses and dissertations of several graduate and doctoral students, including Dr. Michael Lynch, who was our last speaker in this series. With a commitment to public history and community engagement, Dr. Magra has published 2 books on the American Revolution. The Fisherman's Cause examines the New England cod fisheries and the transatlantic business rivalries and resource competition among fish merchants that helped bring about the imperial crisis. His book, Poseidon's Curse, explains why British naval impressment contributed to the origins of the revolution. He's currently completing an edited collection of essays on the military history of the Declaration of Independence that will be out with the University of Tennessee Press in July for the 250th anniversary. I should mention that after his talk, Dr. Magra will take questions from the audience following this presentation, and so if you have questions for him, please make your way to a microphone during this session. So again, welcome and thank you for attending, and join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Magra to the podium. I think this is the one.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Okay. I don't use a microphone when I teach, and I taught the American Revolution this morning. It was Lexington and Concord Day, Bring a Friend Day in my American Revolution course. It's my favorite class to teach. I've taught this course every spring semester for 20 years, and I hope to teach it another 20. Can you all believe it's been 250 years since 1776? Just let that sink in. 250 years. We're blessed to have lived in a nation that survived divisive days. The United States has made it through at least one civil war, 2 world wars. And this year, more than ever, we celebrate perseverance despite division. This year in particular, we celebrate moments when Americans came together, such as the signing of the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, nearly 250 years ago. This anniversary year gives us an opportunity to reflect on unifying principles that connect Americans. Principles such as democracy and self-governance, which were first established in our region, in Watauga, in 1772. I want to thank Newell and Mary Lee Witherspoon and their entire family for this lecture series. We need more opportunities such as this to come together as Americans. And I'm grateful to Dr. Aaron Astor for the invitation, and grateful to the East Tennessee History Center for filming this, and forever grateful to the Daughters of the American Revolution. You all know how wonderful they are. They have multiple branches in our region. We might have more branches of Daughters of the American Revolution than any other city in the United States. We're blessed to have them. What you might not know is that this year they were offering $25,000 for student essays on the American Revolution, and they were offering 10 of those essay prizes. I gave students in my American Revolution course an entire week to work on their essays for that, and wouldn't it be neat if one of them won and we could say someone in Knoxville, Tennessee won one of those precious awards. How many of you were here for the first lecture in this lecture series? Look at all those hands. Now, of those hands that are up, how many of you got extra credit from Dr. Astor? How many of you were here for the first 2? All 3? Look at that. All right. That's fantastic. There were a lot of hands, Dr. Astor. Southern Appalachia was the epicenter of American self-governance. In between 1763 and 1776, the tension between restrictive British imperial policies and the irrepressible westward movement of settlers, such as John Sevier and his family, turned the Appalachian Mountains into democratic testing grounds. On the edges of the empire, isolated communities were forced to navigate a vacuum of political authority. The Watauga settlers established the first independent constitutional government on the continent years before the formal separation from Great Britain. These settlers were part of the transformation of North American borderlands between 1763 and 1776. The origins of Wataugan self-governance can be traced to the end of the French and Indian War, a conflict that fundamentally restructured the geopolitical map of North America. The 1763 Treaty of Paris granted Great Britain sovereignty, and that's a big word, sovereignty, over a seaborne and territorial empire of staggering proportions. This vast acquisition brought immediate administrative and financial crisis that the Crown was ill prepared to handle. The British government faced an enormous national debt, nearly double what it had been before the French and Indian War. To ministers in London, the American colonies were a valuable resource that now required expansive protection. They calculated that the costs of defending a dispersed frontier population against indigenous resistance would far outweigh any immediate tax revenue generated from those lands. To mitigate these challenges, prevent further costly conflicts, King George III issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763 on October 7th. This decree was a pivotal shift in imperial administration, establishing 4 new colonies while effectively closing the western frontier to expansion. It drew a red line along the crest of the Appalachian Mountains, designating all land to the west as an Indian reserve. The proclamation signaled the end of solitary neglect, the era during which Britain had largely allowed the American colonies to manage their own internal affairs. For the first time, the Crown was asserting a direct, restrictive authority over where settlers could live. Nearly 10,000 British soldiers were stationed along the frontier to enforce the proclamation line. This was a military deployment that Americans were expected to finance. This standing army became a source of deep resentment for settlers who viewed them not as protectors but as jailers. The proclamation line was not merely a geographic boundary, it was a legal assertion that the king held ultimate sovereignty over the American lands. It challenged the colonial charters that many believed granted colonies land from sea to shining sea. This geographic restriction became the first in a long list of grievances that led Americans to question the legitimacy of British administration. During the 1760s, the Watauga region was a domain of the long hunters, men who disappeared into the wilderness for months or years at a time to hunt deer and gather pelts. Men such as Daniel Boone and Caspar Mansker were active hunters in this region. They were not settlers in the traditional sense, but they provided the geographic intelligence that made settlement possible here. Boone, in particular, acted as a cultural bridge, navigating the complex boundaries between British authorities, land speculators, and the Cherokee in the region. These hunters were the first to identify the Watauga fields for settlers, ancient indigenous agricultural sites that provided ready-made clearings for the first cabins, sparing the initial pioneers the Herculean task of clearing virgin forest. Watauga settlement began in earnest following the Treaty of Fort Stanwix in 1768 that spurred westward expansion into the Ohio River Valley and regions further south. However, the British Crown's proclamation of 1763 was still in force, and it had strictly forbidden settlement west of the mountains. The people who ignored this mandate and crossed the mountains were, by definition, outlaws. Yet they were not lawless men. In terms of South Appalachia, settlers were primarily families from Virginia and North Carolina, many of whom were seeking refuge from troubles on the coast. A significant portion of the Watauga population consisted of people who had been involved with the regulator movement in North Carolina. These were small-scale farmers who had risen up against corrupt local officials who used excessive taxes and legal fees to strip frontiersmen of their land. Just like the later Shays Rebellion, the frontiersmen were defeated by a private army at the Battle of Alamance in 1771, and many regulators faced the loss of their lands in North Carolina and financial ruin. For them, the Watauga Valley was not just a new home, it was a sanctuary from a government they viewed as predatory. This experience ensured that the Watauga settlement would be built on a foundation of deep-seated skepticism toward any centralized authority. They didn't just want land, they wanted a system they could finally trust because they were the ones administering it. Among these early arrivals was William Bean. Bean was a veteran of the French and Indian War, and he established a cabin at the junction of the Watauga River and Boone's Creek in 1769. His arrival signaled the beginning of a migration pattern that saw hunters, farmers, and disgruntled taxpayers trickling over the mountains, carrying little more than their hunting rifles, their livestock, and a fierce desire for a better way of life. The leadership of the Watauga Association was anchored by James Robertson, a man of remarkable steady character, diplomatic skill. Born in Virginia, raised in North Carolina, Robertson was a regulator who sought a life free from the heavy-handed taxation of North Carolina's Governor William Tryon. Robertson was not a firebrand. He was a businessman and a diplomat. He recognized that for the settlement to survive, it needed a formal structure, both to resolve land disputes and to maintain peace with the neighboring Cherokee. When a British survey of 1771 revealed that the settlers were illegally located on native land, it was Robertson who traveled to the Cherokee capital of Chota to negotiate a lease. He understood that the survival of the settlement depended on it. Robertson was a quieter version of John Sevier, who was much more charismatic. It was Sevier's legendary charisma that earned him the unwavering loyalty of the Watauga militiamen. Sevier's new home, Mount Pleasant, became a social hub and a fortress. He was a quintessential citizen soldier, a man who could shift seamlessly from the surveyor's transit to the officer's sword. His ability to mobilize settlers for defense helped the Watauga settlement to survive. By 1775, the population of the Watauga settlement had grown enough to attract the attention of Richard Henderson. Henderson was a North Carolina judge who saw the Watauga Association as a stepping stone for his massive Transylvania Company real estate development project. While the average Wataugan was looking for 50 acres, Henderson was looking for 20 million. Watauga was a melting pot of the colonial frontier. While the leadership was largely of English and Scots-Irish descent, the community included land speculators, indentured servants seeking a fresh start, and even a small number of enslaved African Americans. Life was defined by the Watauga Fort, or the Watauga Station, a small fortified cluster of cabins that served as a defensible position. Women played a pivotal role in the survival of Watauga, though their names often appear less frequently in official records. One notable exception is Catherine Bonnie Kate Sherrill. During a Cherokee attack on Fort Watauga in 1776, She was locked outside the gates. In a moment of high drama, she scaled the stockade walls while being shot at, only to be pulled over the top to safety by John Sevier himself. This grit was not an anecdote, it was a standard. Raising children in a settlement while simultaneously managing the domestic economy was no easy balance in Watauga. The Cherokee also came and went in and out of Watauga. Leaders like Little Carpenter sought a peaceful coexistence through trade and land leases. However, his son, Dragging Canoe, represented a faction of young warriors who foresaw the eventual destruction of their way of life. Both the Cherokee and the settlers were fighting for their own versions of sovereignty. John Sevier helped the Watauga settlers achieve self-governance. Born in 1745 in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, Sevier was a descendant of French Huguenots. His family history was one of displacement and the search for religious and political freedom, which likely contributed to his innate distrust of centralized autocratic authority. I think the fact that his dad, Valentine, also had his life planned out for him had something to do with that as well. Sevier was a man of restless energy, possessing the rugged physicality of a militiaman and the sharp instincts of a merchant. He grew up in a world where the British government was a distant concept, and family survival depended on one's own hands and the loyalty of neighbors. By his early 20s, he was already a noted surveyor, innkeeper, and trader in the Virginia backcountry. Sevier's early biography is a story of an individual who transitioned from a loyal colonial subject to a frontier statesman. He wasn't an intellectual in the same vein as his fellow Virginian Thomas Jefferson, but Sevier was a master of practical leadership. He understood that in the wilderness, titles and royal commissions meant very little compared to competence and courage. Around 1773, Sevier moved his wife and children toward the Watauga River Valley. Sevier's leadership in these early years was defined by his ability to inspire diverse and often prickly pioneers. He was a man who could lead a scouting party one day and preside over a local court the next. His charisma made him a natural focal point for the community that was quickly realizing it was on its own. He embodied the shift from subjecthood to citizenship. In the Watauga Valley, Sevier helped cultivate a society where authority was derived from the community's collective will. This was not a theoretical exercise for him. It was a matter of daily survival against both the elements and the constant threat of conflict. His residency on the Nolichucky River earned him the nickname Nolichucky Jack, a name that would eventually become legendary across the South. But in the early 1770s, he was simply one of many men trying to navigate the legal and physical challenges of living outside the empire's red line. Sevier's early career is essential to understanding the frontier's role in the Revolution because he represented the rise of democratic authority. He showed that leadership could emerge outside of royal decree or aristocratic birth. The Watauga Association, established in 1772, represented the most significant milestone in America's transition to self-governance. The settlement's origins were rooted in a massive blunder. The settlers initially believed they were within the legal boundaries of Virginia. However, a 1771 survey conducted by Colonel John Donaldson revealed the uncomfortable truth. The Watauga, Nolichucky, and Holston valleys were actually located south of the Virginia line within the territory of North Carolina. This meant they were occupying land that the British Crown had explicitly guaranteed to the Cherokee. after that 1763 peace treaty. Facing an imperial order to vacate their homes and return east, the settlers found themselves in a desperate position. They had invested their lives in the clearings and cabins, and they had no intention of leaving. They realized that neither Virginia nor North Carolina could or would protect their interests in this disputed territory. In May 1772, the settlers took an audacious step toward autonomy. Recognizing that they could not legally own the land, they negotiated a 10-year lease directly with the Cherokee. This was a legal fiction designed to provide a veneer of legitimacy to their presence while bypassing the proclamation line of 1763. To manage their internal affairs in this legal vacuum, they drafted the Articles of the Watauga Association. This was the first written constitution authored by American-born freemen on the continent. It was a pragmatic exercise in republicanism, born from the need for law and order on the frontier. The Articles established a 5-member court of law consisting of elected magistrates. This judicial body was responsible for regulating court cases, recording land titles, and ensuring the settlement did not become a haven for criminals and debtors. It was a governing body formed by the people, for the people. The Wataugan settlers were not lawless men and women. Wataugan self-governance was not a rejection of the law, but a demand for it in the face of unresponsive external governments. The settlers believed they possessed an innate sense of justice and the rational faculty to govern themselves. They were practicing the consent of the governed long before it became a national rallying cry. This political experiment proved that democracy was achievable. The Wataugans demonstrated that Americans were capable of creating their own functional, stable systems of rule. The governance model was simple and it was transparent. Magistrates were elected by the community and their decisions were public. They oversaw the constitution of a courthouse and a jail at Sycamore Shoals. These were physical symbols of their commitment to law and order. While the Wataugans did not explicitly claim independence from the British Crown at this point, their existence was a dangerous example. Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore, wrote in 1774 that the quote-unquote republic in the woods had formed a government, quote, distinct from and independent of His Majesty's authority, end quote, a clear sign of a growing rift. The Wataugan experiment was then put to the test by a land purchase. In early 1775, Richard Henderson formed the Transylvania Company with the goal of creating a new proprietary colony with himself at the head. This ambition led to the Treaty of Sycamore Shoals in March 1775. Henderson met with approximately 1,200 Cherokee people on the banks of the Watauga River. In exchange for trade goods valued at approximately 10,000 pounds sterling, the Cherokee ostensibly transferred roughly 20 million acres to the Transylvania Company. I don't know what 20 million acres would look like. I don't know what that would feel like. I grew up on 3 acres in western Pennsylvania, and I never want to have to mow that much grass ever again. This was one of the largest private land transactions in history. The Watauga settlers then used the momentum of Henderson's negotiations to secure their own individual permanent deeds. Settlers in Watauga converted their previous leases into ownership for additional payments of 2,000 pounds sterling. All these transactions, all of them, every single one, defied the 1763 proclamation line. They were all illegal. By treating directly with indigenous nations as sovereign entities, the settlers were essentially conducting their own foreign policy. They were asserting a right to property that bypassed the royal prerogative entirely. This challenged the 1763 proclamation, which held that only the Crown could negotiate with Native Americans for land. The land deals were controversial within the Cherokee community, and they led to a deep schism. Dragging Canoe, the son of Little Carpenter, refused to recognize the sale. He famously warned the Watauga settlers that they had purchased a quote-unquote dark and bloody ground, and he promised fierce resistance. The Wataugans, however, viewed these purchases as the final legal brick in the wall of their independence. They were no longer squatters. They were landowners with a paper trail, even if that paper was considered illegal in London. Their commitment to these deeds would eventually fuel their military resolve. Henderson and the Wataugans insisted, and this is the case that they made, friends. So if you're wondering how they're thinking about getting around this proclamation line of 63, here's their thinking, their rationale. You all ready for this? It's interesting. They insisted that their labor and occupancy gave them a legal right to own the land. They believed that the people who bled for the land and cleared the forest had a greater claim to it than a king 3,000 miles away who had never even been there. The land deals at Sycamore Shoals were the economic equivalent of the Boston Tea Party. They were a direct challenge to the Crown's monopoly on the American interior. They signaled that the settlers were prepared to create their own economy, their own way of life, independent of imperial plans. By the spring of 1775, the Watauga Association was a fully functioning, self-contained republic in all but name. They had their own laws. They had their own courts. They had their own land deeds and a growing sense of a distinct identity that was no longer British. While the Wataugans were practicing independence in the mountains, Thomas Jefferson was justifying that independence. Jefferson's connection to the frontier was both intellectual and personal. He was born in the Albemarle County in Virginia, far from the coast, and he never lost his fascination with Western lands. To Jefferson, the independent farmer owning his own land was the only true guarantor of a free republic. He viewed westward expansion not as a demographic problem to be managed, but as the essential mechanism for creating what he would later call an empire for liberty. In his 1774 treatise, A Summary View of the Rights of British America, Jefferson presented a radical theory of individual land rights. He argued that the American colonies were settled by individuals exercising a natural right to migrate and establish new societies. This was a direct defense of his fellow Virginians who had already relocated to Watauga. Jefferson asserted that when the original colonists left Great Britain, they quote-unquote left Parliament behind. He believed they carried with them the right to hold land in tenure, meaning they owned it outright rather than holding it as a grant from a feudal superior like King George III. This was a total rejection of the Crown's land policies. Jefferson characterized the Royal Proclamation of '63 as a profound injustice and an arbitrary restriction on the natural right of human beings to pursue happiness. To Jefferson, the restriction of the West was a core violation of the social contract between the king and his people. Jefferson believed the West was a safety valve of democracy. In his way of thinking, a republic could only survive if its citizens remained independent and self-sufficient. This required a constant supply of land to prevent the urbanization and dependency that Jefferson believed had already corrupted European societies. The influence of westward expansion is clearly visible in the Declaration of Independence in 1776. As a primary author, Jefferson ensured that the grievances of frontier were given equal weight to those in coastal communities. He was writing for the backwoodsman as much as the merchant. The seventh grievance in the Declaration explicitly condemns the king for, quote, endeavoring to prevent the population of these states, end quote. Did you ever think about the proclamation of 63 as preventing the population of America from growing, disincentivizing people from coming overseas, indenturing themselves from 4, 5, 6, 7 years to get here with the hope of owning land? Well, that shop is closed, is what Jefferson is saying in the Declaration of Independence. It cites the obstruction of laws for the naturalization of foreigners and the raising the condition of new appropriations of lands. This was a direct strike at the proclamation line. The Declaration of Independence further accused the king of exciting, quote unquote, domestic insurrections and bringing on the, quote, merciless Indian savages, end quote. For the people of Watauga, this was a direct reference to the British Cherokee military alliance that threatened their very existence in the summer of '76. Watauga settlers would have read the Declaration as a confirmation of their own struggles. Jefferson had taken their practical, muddy reality and turned it into a universal principle of liberty. He had bridged the gap between the Appalachian settler and the coastal merchant. Jefferson's rhetoric successfully synthesized the frontier struggle for land with the coast's struggle for political representation. He created a unified American identity based on the consent of the governed, a concept that the Wataugans had already been living with for 4 years. The outbreak of the American Revolutionary War fundamentally altered the strategic landscape for the Watauga settlement. They realized that their semi-autonomous status was no longer sustainable in a state of total war. They had to choose a side, and for the most, the choice was clear. The British government began to leverage its alliances with indigenous nations, supplying weapons to Dragging Canoe and his allies. The frontier settlements were now on the front lines of a global conflict. The Wataugans were no longer just pioneers, they were targets of the Crown's military strategy. In the spring of 1776, the settlers reorganized their government into the Washington District. This was the first geographic area in the colonies to be named after George Washington. They formed a 13-member committee of safety to manage wartime functions and oversee the defense of the region. On August 22, 1776, they submitted a formal petition to the North Carolina Provincial Congress requesting to be annexed. The 1776 Watauga Petition is a masterpiece of revolutionary rhetoric signed by over 400 male settlers who were ready to pledge their lives and their sacred honor to the cause. The petition was an eloquent defense of their actions over the previous years. They addressed the common slander that they were, quote unquote, lawless mob, highlighting instead their success in establishing a functional court system and maintaining order in the absence of imperial support. The petitioners cited the, quote, want of proper authority to try and punish felons end quote, as a primary reason for seeking formal legal standing. They wanted to ensure that their society remained stable, even as the storms of war gathered around them. Then they offered their military support to the Patriot cause in exchange for legal recognition. By asking North Carolina to be annexed, the Watauгans were essentially asking to be recognized as citizens of a revolutionary state, trading their total independence for a place in the new Union. North Carolina accepted the petition, officially incorporating the region as the Washington District in late '76. This move provided the settlers with the legal protection and military support that they desperately needed, while providing the American rebellion with a buffer against British-aligned forces in the interior. John Severe's military leadership during this period was critical. In July '76, he played a key role in defending Fort Watauga against a massive Cherokee assault. His prowess as a fighter and his ability to organize the Over-Mountain men into a disciplinary force solidified the frontier's commitment to the new American Republic. The history of the frontier and the origins of the American Revolution reveal a profound link between territorial expansion and political ideology. The Royal Proclamation of 1763, by attempting to freeze American demographic expansion, inadvertently catalyzed a revolutionary consciousness on the empire's edge. The settlers of the Watauga Association didn't set out to be rebels. They were transformed into Republicans by the necessity of creating order where imperial authority had failed. They proved that the principle of self-governance was not a mere abstraction, but a practical tool for survival. The extra land purchases at Sycamore Shoals asserted a colonial right to property and contract that was fundamentally at odds with British imperial law. These acts of negotiated autonomy were the economic foundation of the frontier's pursuit of liberty. Thomas Jefferson's brilliance lay in his ability to weave these frontier realities into a coherent national narrative. By framing the restriction of westward expansion as a violation of natural rights, he ensured that the American Republic would be an expansionist entity from its very inception. By the end of 1776, the Trans-Appalachian West was no longer a reserve or a wilderness in the eyes of the new American government. It was the Washington District, a vital part of a new nation that had just declared its right to exist. The 1776 Declaration of Independence was the final seal on a process that had been underway in the mountains for years. It was a formal recognition of a truth that the Wataugans had already proven, that the American spirit is defined by the courage to cross a line and the wisdom to govern the space beyond it. Thank you all. Questions about Watauga, Severe, the origins of the American Revolution, the British Navy? What do you got? Lexington and Concord?
I'll pass, bring the mic around if anybody has a question here. Thank you very much. This is great. So let me bring over to Cypress.
So in Watauga, you mentioned how there were a lot of how during the war there were a lot of revolutionaries. Were there any loyalists within Watauga, or no?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it has to be noted that the period from the Association 72 and the Declaration of Independence in 76, that there's kind of a weeding out period. And people are pushed out of Watauga during those 4 years. There are people, remember, that the Wataugan settlers don't want in Watauga. One of the groups of people are convicted felons. They don't want people fleeing to the mountains to get away from the law and living in Watauga as their neighbors. That's not what they want. And as we get closer to 76, there's a misconception, and it's baked into British military strategy during the Revolutionary War, that the South has a lot of loyalists in it. And this complicates Cornwallis and his expedition in 1780 when he trusts Patrick Ferguson to go into the backcountry to raise a loyalist army. He doesn't find one. What he finds are pissed off Wataugans who come over the mountain and march 300 miles to kick his butt.
You showed a nice picture of the petition of 1776. Where does that original document exist today?
So the petition, you can find this online. There are various libraries and archives that have a copy of it. The East Tennessee History Center just might check them out, but the North Carolina archives definitely do. Okay. But you will get access to the original and to a transcript, which is a lot easier to read. Yeah. Yep.
How much did Thomas Jefferson know about the Watauga settlement?
Yeah, he was very well informed. You have to remember that John Sevier and a lot of the Wataugans came from Virginia. They're his neighbors. He personally knew them. And you have to remember that the Wataugans pissed off Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia. He really did not want his people going across that boundary line, that 63 line. It made a mockery of his own authority, not just the king's authority, but Lord Dunmore's authority. And I like to back the bus over Lord Dunmore when I teach about Dunmore's proclamation in 75. He wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. And angering that man led to a lot of discussions in the Virginia legislature, the House of Burgesses, which Jefferson was a part of. He's a part of these discussions on a weekly, monthly basis where Dunmore is talking about the Republic in the woods and the evils associated. So it's on his mind for sure when he sits down to craft the Declaration of Independence and all those 27 grievances. King George III did this, King George III did that. He's very mindful of trying to bring together a divided America and what kind of language will bring people together. He's very mindful of wanting to include people on the frontier in addition to coastal communities like Philadelphia or Charleston, New York City.
I have a question I want to ask you.
Yeah, fire away.
The Abingdon community, when we look ahead to the Battle of Kings Mountain, the Over Mountain men who come over, Watauga Old Fields, of course, is one of the mustering grounds, rallying points, but it's not the only one. And Abingdon, Virginia is another one.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is that a similar kind of settlement as Watauga, or is that really kind of different?
My understanding is it's different in the constitutional basis for Watauga and the legal systems that are set up in Watauga. My understanding is Watauga has the very first constitution on the entire continent. that sets it apart from everything, friends, that makes our region unique and the settlers in our region unique. You know, you're absolutely right that they're not the only ones who are part of that Over Mountain group that goes to take on Patrick Ferguson at Kings Mountain, and I like to back the bus over Ferguson too. Ferguson's way of going about getting loyalists to join Cornwallis's army was to use strong language, to say that you're less of a man if you don't fight for the British Army, to say that you're a bunch of dogs if you don't join Cornwallis, to say we're going to bring fire and sword. That's straight out of the Old Testament, friends. We're going to bring fire and sword into your country. And that kind of strong talk upset a lot of folks, not just in Watauga, not just in Virginia, but even in what is today Kentucky. There were settlers who came to Sycamore Shoals to muster, to go 300 miles to Kings Mountain. Patrick Ferguson really he thought he was lighting a fire under people's butts to join Cornwallis, but he lit a fire under people to come and kill him. And that's what happened.
I have two questions. I guess the first one's more of a statement. When you mentioned the 20 million acres on the land lease, I did the math. That's approximately 3/4 the size of Tennessee. Unfathomably large. Second thing is, how could we all get invited to your next Bring a Friend class? We would all love to come.
You all are welcome to come. I also get asked if I can audit my class, and the answer is yes. You all are invited. You have a standing invitation. You just email me first, maybe. We'll set it up.
I have two questions. One may be a little difficult. I'm a little fuzzy on the boundary lines of the Washington district. I know it was Watauga, but did it go west from there? And how far west did it go? I'm not sure about the Donaldson line. I'm thinking of like Martin Station, which is technically in Virginia today,
Yeah.
but that gets a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
And then the second question is totally unrelated. Up by Concord, I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with someone who said the Redcoats were actually after a powder mill at Concord, and I had never heard that. I didn't think that was true, but
I hadn't heard that either. That would be fascinating to find out if that's true or not. Yeah, no, I hadn't heard that they were after a powder mill. And the boundary lines, you're right to be questioning that. They're fuzzy to begin with, okay? And that's part of the issue here, is that these lines are never agreed on by all the Cherokee people. They're agreed upon by a certain number at a certain point, and immediately afterwards, the Cherokee are contacting the British government, the Native American agents that are set up in the region, and directly writing to King George III and saying, this is all wrong. And then even after the American Revolution, those borders are then redrawn in 1790 when this whole region becomes a Southwest Territory and William Blount becomes the governor. And it's what makes it so complicated, and why I can't answer your excellent question, is that Blount and Sevier and Robertson, in addition to all the other hats that they're wearing, they're land speculators, they're real estate developers. And so these boundary lines are continually redrawing them to get more and more land as they negotiate different leases and treaties with the Cherokee people, who themselves are disputing those very agreements. Yep.
Is there a modern map that we can see the proclamation line of 1763, like the towns?
Oh, Yes, did I have a map of the proclamation line, friends? Can you all remember if that was one of my? So the surveyor who did this line, his name was William Petty, like Richard Petty in NASCAR. The Petty family, Petty, they had gained noble status in the 1650s by dividing Ireland up into north and south. They drew a line across Ireland and said, these are savage Irish peoples, these are barbaric Irish peoples, and you need a pass if you want to get in there, and we don't recommend it. And King George III hired the Petty family. His grandson drew the line here with the help of a military expedition. And that red line that you see on the map was initially just an estimate of the Appalachian Mountain Range, which, did you all know the Appalachian Mountains stretch up and down the eastern seaboard of North America? Did you know that the island of Newfoundland in the North Atlantic Ocean is a peak in the Appalachian Mountain Range? Thing's huge. And between 1763 and roughly 1770, William Petty and that expedition are negotiating with various Native American groups to nail down exactly where that red line is, but it's darn hard and is never set in concrete and is disputed, and Americans violate it, just like we violate the speed limit on Route 40 going downtown all the time. A little bit harder on the Alcoa Highway with all those police, but. Yep, 1784, yep. And that's an interesting part of this story. And one I don't get into here because I really wanted to stick it to this Revolutionary era story for the 250th and talk about the Declaration of Independence and the influence of Watauga on the Declaration of Independence. There's a lot of bleed through between Watauga and Franklin. A lot of the same people and a lot of the same issues trying to carve out a life for themselves, trying to establish a government by the people for the people that they want. Yeah. Any particular question about Franklin, or just your? Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating little moment. What might have been if the state of Franklin had survived, how that would have changed the trajectory of the state of Tennessee in 1796. I don't know. I think that the Southwest Territory in 1790 would have obliterated it anyway. And I think William Blount, as governor, would have wanted it that way. Blount is a big-time real estate developer as well. He's not at Henderson's level, but he gets up to about 3 million acres.
My name's Jim Holder from the Washington District on the Carter County, Tennessee today. Thank you for this presentation.
Thank you.
I'm so proud. Don't always create this presentation. But if you have your presentation available for distribution, other people seeing it,
Yes.
really fine, wonderful.
If you turn around, a few seats behind you, sir, is a fine gentleman who's recording this for the East Tennessee History Center, and they'll be putting it online, and you can all access it along with this PowerPoint presentation that you see. Happy to.
Remember, the other two lectures are also going to, the first one is already online. The second one will be, I'm sure, soon as well. 2 weeks. Any other? Somebody have a question here? Oh, you got a question back there.
Yeah, God knows. God knows. 20 million. I mean, So a lot of our founding fathers are shareholders in real estate development companies. It's not unusual. This is big business in early America, and the goal of these things is always to clear land, to build roads in, and to then send agents over to Europe to convince poor people to indenture themselves for 4, 5, 6, 7 years to afford the expense of relocating with their families across the Atlantic Ocean to America, to then go out to the frontier to these lands, to then purchase those lands from the various companies and settle there. Now, how the heck do you populate 20 million acres? That's pie in the sky real estate development that I can only imagine what the actual plan was for the Transylvania Company. Yeah, it sure did. And you have to realize that the federal government gets involved after the American Revolution. The federal government, like the British government, asserts a degree of sovereignty and a degree of control over those lands by virtue of the 1783 peace treaty that gives the federal government, not the Transylvania Company, not the Ohio Company, not any of these real estate development companies, gives the federal government sovereignty over it. One of the ways that the Southwest Territories created in 1790 is that North Carolina gives the federal government its land in this region in exchange for the debts that North Carolina owed to the federal government for military protection during the Revolutionary War. There's kind of a handshake there, and the Southwest Territories created in 1790 as a result of that. So there's a degree of federal sovereignty over Western lands after the Revolution that complicates those land deals. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Movements generally have various points of leadership. What do you see, or who do you see as being the major player in the movement in drawing this part of the nation together with the revolution?
Yeah.
And how do they communicate? You ever thought about, you talk about knowing each other in Virginia, but in this area, there was the kinds of communication we have today was not available.
Yeah.
So how did that movement, in your opinion, become communicated and become broad?
Yeah, certainly Sevier and Robertson have to be included in any discussion of leaders. And the communication is a real interesting story that involves letter writing, lots of it, and duplicates and triplicates of those letters because one is not enough, and gossip, which involves a lot of women getting together for dinner parties and talking. And that's true in Virginia as well as the frontier, because in Virginia, people are spread out on large plantations, okay? Like I said, I grew up on 3 acres in western Pennsylvania. You could barely see my neighbors, but we communicated probably too much.
Any other questions? Time for maybe one more. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You don't hear him mention those later on.
Yeah, that's right. Keep championing him, and maybe one day we will. Yeah, you know, there are 400 signatures on that Watauga petition in '76, and we do for the most part highlight a handful of them. Yep, that's true.
One more question I wanted to ask. In 1772, when they first formed the association, the document creating that is available? Is that not available anywhere?
No, it is not. What we do have is that '76 petition, which references it. And so most of, if you all have this in your attic, it is worth a fortune.
So it's still missing. It's still
But also, you should just give that to the East Tennessee History Center, and they will handle that for the public and do a great job of it.
So it was North Carolina. It was Tryon who called it a dangerous example. Was it Tryon? who said-
Virginia.
Oh, Virginia.
Virginia. Dunmore.
Dunmore said it was a
the
dangerous
Republic in the
example of
woods.
self.
Tryon is the one who angered the regulators in
Gotcha.
the 1760s, early 70s.
But so dangerous is gone.
Yeah.
That's well. Everybody, let's give applause to Dr. Magra. Thank you very much again. And I also want to thank everybody for coming to all, especially it seems many of you have come to all three of the lectures. This was really an honor. This is definitely a great, I think, for the Witherspoons. I know that they've enjoyed this very much. And want to thank you all for coming out. We will put the video, like I said, one of them is already online. There'll be another one in a couple weeks, and then shortly after that will be this one. But thank you again, everybody, and have a good night.